Watch this. A gunman opened fire in a New York City emergency room, the waiting area. The victim, who was being treated for a previous injury, was shot in the forearm. He is expected to recover. The suspect is in custody. He tried to sign in for medical help. Meanwhile, the White House is defending President Biden's handling on crime. Ashley, what are they saying about it?
Well, the White House continues to push back on the perception that the administration is soft on crime, largely focusing its efforts on stopping gun violence. But that said, let's go down the list. 2 officers fatally shot last week in New York City. A Washington, D.C. police officer shot over the weekend. In Chicago, 22 people were shot this past weekend, and your deputy was shot and killed in Houston Sunday morning during a routine traffic stop. Here's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Listen.
The president is never going to be satisfied or complacent when officers are being gunned down or when Americans have to worry about whether they can safely ride the subway or bus or even be at work. We've seen a surge in crime. Obviously, this weekend is a glaring example of that, especially gun violence over the last 2 years, and the president has been aggressive in using the tools at our disposal to combat that.
Well, you remember the defund police campaign? Well, Biden told a gathering of U.S. mayors last week that funding for police departments should be increased, he says, not cut. The president has also called on Congress to pass tougher gun laws that include more thorough background checks, but so far that has failed. Stu.
Not guns, it's values and soft on crime rules.
Right.
That's exactly. Just an opinion. That's where I'm coming from. Thanks, Ashley. Come on in. Look, Jason Rantz is with us. Look, let me go through this. A man shot in an emergency room waiting area in New York City. White House press secretary says this rise in violent crime is really all about guns. It seems to me that we're treating criminals as victims. We got it the wrong way round. What say you?
That's exactly what I say. In fact, I have an op-ed basically on that point with FoxNews.com. I mean, when we talk about this being a gun problem, when the federal government says that, and in a lot of cases when the Democrats are saying that, they treat all guns equally. They treat all people who have guns the exact same way, which is they're all villains. But as you know, there are a lot of people in this country, in New York, and across the country who have purchased guns to protect themselves. And those are the people who tend to get caught up in these new gun laws that get put forward. The folks who are using guns illegally, they're not purchasing them and getting away through loopholes at gun shows and whatnot. They are oftentimes stolen guns. These are guns that are very clearly not the problem. It's the person pulling the trigger. But instead of actually punishing those people, we pretend that they're the victims of some kind of ism in this country. Racism that's institutionalized, sexism that's institutionalized. And so rather than punish, we decided as a country right now, because of Democratic leadership, that we're going to put them into restorative justice programs, diverting them from prison.
Your video was breaking up there, and so was your audio. We heard what you got to say. But how do we turn this around? I mean, the authorities say it's guns. I say it's values. You've got to get back to the values that America holds dear. Private property. You commit a crime, you're punished. That's what I want to get back to. But how do we do that?
We do that in part by promoting families. A lot of times, especially when we're talking about youth who get involved in gangs and other violent acts, they're doing so because they come from broken families. So we have to make sure that we're keeping them together, and we have responsible adults who are there to guide these kids to make sure they don't go down that wrong path and get taken advantage of, exploited by criminal adults who see the vulnerability. Number 2, we have to make sure that we're teaching this stuff in the classroom. But what are we teaching right now? There's this movement to teach that this country is evil, that private property ownership is an extension of white supremacy. And so when we're telling kids that this country is not worth defending or saving or respecting, well, guess what? We start to see this kind of deterioration. It's only going to get worse if we don't get ahead of it. Now, the CRT stuff isn't impacting the crime at this point, but it very clearly can once these kids actually get out of school, get sort of indoctrinated with this belief, and then decide, yeah, you know what, I'm not going to push any sort of laws that would respect private property ownership, for example, because, well, that's evil and racist anyway. We have to get back to those basics, and I think you're spot on. It's all about values. People who have strong character and moral values, guess what? They're not going into an emergency room and shooting someone with the intent to kill.
Very true. Jason Rantz, thanks for being here. Always appreciate it, and good subject, too.
Thanks, Stuart.
Check